On the 5th of July, 1899, a man stood on a scaffold in Sevierville, Tennessee, and told the crowd what was going to happen next. He said the man who had paid for the murder would turn himself in. He said the man would be tried. And he said the result would be an acquittal. Then they hanged him. It took 4 years and 9 months. It took 5 separate trials. And it happened exactly the way he said it would. This is the story of the Sevier County Whitecaps, who they were, what they did, and the one question the record actually answers. Not who fired the shots. 2 men confessed to that, and both of them hanged for it. The question is who paid and what it cost him. Sevier County sits on the Tennessee side of the Great Smoky Mountains. Today it is Gatlinburg and Pigeon Forge and 11 million visitors a year. In 1890 it was farms and coves, a courthouse town of a few hundred people, and roads that turned to mud for 4 months of the year. Something started there around 1891. The newspaper account written 6 years later described the beginning plainly. A small band of disguised men began, in the paper's words, at long intervals beating unmercifully the women of loose character. That is the language of 1897, and it is worth sitting with for a second. These were men in masks whipping women, and the charge against the women was their reputation. For a time, the same account says, no attention was paid to these outrages by the people or the authorities. That sentence is the hinge of the whole story. Nobody stopped it because of who it was happening to. Emboldened by this, the paper goes on. The perpetrators became more frequent in their deeds of violence, and every woman in the county of suspicious character felt the cruel cut of the whip. Under cover of darkness and in deep disguise, the account continues. They began to visit the homes of peaceful citizens, by threat and torture extorting from them money and valuables. What made Sevier County different was how completely they won. For most of a decade, nobody could convict them because nobody in the county would testify. The method was a written notice. It came at night and it named a deadline. In February 1897, the Maryville Times, published 1 county west, ran an account of what happened to a farmer named Bob Lowe. The paper called them that lawless clan, the Whitecaps, who have been terrorizing citizens of that county the past 5 years. Lowe farmed in Richardson's Cove, 5 miles east of Sevierville. He received 2 notices telling him that if he and his family did not leave the county in 10 days, life to them would not be at all pleasant. The first came a week earlier and he ignored it. The second was found on his front yard gate post. It told him to make his exit post haste or he would be dealt with summarily. He left. His brother told the reporter that Lowe had, by industry and honesty, bought and paid for a nice little farm on which he intended to spend the remainder of his days with his family. No crime was alleged against him. No court was involved. A piece of paper on a gate post moved a family off land they owned. By 1897, this had gone on long enough that the Tennessee legislature passed a bill for the suppression of whitecaps in Sevier County. Read that again. The state of Tennessee wrote a criminal statute aimed at a single county because the ordinary law was not working there. 3 years before that law, some men in the county had already stopped waiting for it. On the night of October 25, 1894, a farmer named Rader, living near Henderson Springs, received a notice that the Whitecaps would visit him that night. Rader told his friends. They decided, in the wire report's phrase, to give the Whitecaps a warm reception. Among them was a young farmer named Lee Shelton. He had been threatened himself. He rode into Sevierville, bought a shotgun, and borrowed $100. The headline the Indianapolis Journal put on it 2 days later gave the whole shape of the thing in 10 words. Killed by a young farmer they had threatened. Late that night, people living near Henderson Springs were woken by a fusillade of shots. When it stopped, they went out into the road. Within a few feet of each other lay the bodies of 3 dead men. Helton had been hit by a score of pistol bullets. 2 other men, Labe Latham and Isaac Keebler, had been killed by his shotgun. On the bodies of Latham and Keebler, under their coats, the neighbors found masks and pistols. 3 men dead in a road, and the only thing anybody could prove was what was in 2 dead men's pockets. Nobody was charged. 2 years and 2 months later, on the night of December 28, 1896, 2 men walked up to a farmhouse 2 miles outside Sevierville. The first wire report reached Washington the next morning. Shot down in cold blood. Tennessee farmer and wife murdered by unknown men. A double murder occurred at a point 2 miles from Sevierville, Sevier County, last night at 11 o'clock. William Whaley and his wife were shot down in cold blood by 2 unknown parties. He came to the house and, without speaking a word, broke down the door and walked in and shot the couple. Was a witness. A woman the report names as Miss Lizzie McMahon. A sister of Mrs. Whaley was present but was unhurt. She had an infant of the Whaleys in her arms when the men entered. It is thought by many, the report says, that 2 men whom Whaley had prosecuted by the grand jury committed the murder. And then, it is claimed that whitecaps, for which Sevier County is famous, had nothing to do with the tragedy. Whaley was an honest farmer. They were. Both men who did it confessed, and both of them said the same thing about why. The Whaleys were witnesses. There was a case pending against a man named Bob Catlett. The charge in that case was carrying a pistol. 2 people were shot dead in their own house in front of a woman holding their baby to break a witness list in a concealed weapons case. Catlett was not a drifter. He was, as several papers put it over the following years, one of the wealthiest men in Sevier County. Before we go on, several things in this record do not line up, and this channel does not paper over that. The first report says William Whaley was 35 and his wife 30. 2.5 years later, the New York Tribune called them 67 and 75. The first report says the witness was Lizzie McMahon, the wife's sister. The Tribune says it was a daughter of the Whaleys. Both agree she was holding a baby. The wire services also placed the murder in 1897 and later in January 1896. The Maryville Times, 16 miles from the house, gives the night of December 28, 1896. That is the date this episode uses. What happened in the county over the next 18 months is the part that usually gets left out. Arrests came. So did trials. In December 1897, a Tennessee paper reported that Pleasant Wynn had been convicted of murder at Sevierville, and that he belonged to the band of whitecaps that operated in Sevier County. On the afternoon of April 6, 1898, while that second trial was going on, the sheriff of Sevier County shot a county magistrate dead on the main street of Sevierville. The magistrate's name was William Wynn. He was the brother of Pleasant Wynn, the man on trial for the Whaley murders. According to the wire report, Wynn was abusing a state's witness. Sheriff Maples told him to stop. Instead of complying, Wynn attempted to draw a pistol. The next morning's headline read, "Whitecaps up in arms." Bloody battle with the authorities feared in Tennessee. The lawless element of Sevier County, the report said, which for several years has organized itself into a band of whitecaps, is in arms, and a bloody battle is expected to be fought at any moment. Sevierville, the county seat 17 miles distant from Knoxville, is in a state of siege. By February 1899, the state had 2 convicted men and was going after the third. Bob Catlett went on trial for the killing of the Whaleys, not in Sevier County, but in Morristown, 60 miles away, because a Sevier County jury was not something the state was willing to try. The Maryville Times reported that both Wynn and Tipton, the convicted murderers, agreed in saying that Catlett instigated the crime. In April 1899, Bob Catlett was turned loose. 3 months later, the state of Tennessee hanged the 2 men who had named him. On the 3rd of July, the New York Tribune carried it on the front page: "Whitecaps to be hanged. 2 of them to pay the penalty for a brutal murder. Please Wynn and Catlett Tipton, the 2 whitecaps who brutally murdered an old man and woman by the name of Whaley in Sevier County about 2 years ago, are to be hanged at Sevierville on Wednesday." The 2 men were being held in the jail at Knoxville. The sheriff of the county, a man named Davis, took them upriver by steamboat with a posse. The Tribune's account of the murder itself adds a detail the first report did not have. The 2 men made the Whaleys stand up in one corner of the room facing them, and then they were instantly killed. The woman with the baby was made to stand and witness the murder and told that if she screamed they would kill her. They were masked, and she could not recognize them. The Tribune's reporter closed on what the state thought it was buying. The hanging, it is thought, will break up a gang of mountain whitecaps who have kept the back mountain counties of East Tennessee in terror for many years. The hanging drew a crowd. The Maryville Times, 16 miles away, printed both men's final written statements in full the following Saturday. Wynn and Tipton, it wrote, paid the death penalty for killing William and Laura Whaley on the night of December 28, 1896. Both men made written statements to the effect that Bob Catlett, who in April was turned loose, was the cause of their death. Catlett Tipton's statement begins: "My story on the witness stand about the crime is a true story. Bob Catlett is the cause of my having to die today. He just kept after me until he overpowered me. Let my fate be a lesson to all who are tempted to keep the company of evildoers. It seems hard for me to part from my dear wife and little children." He then went at the trial itself. When Jet Jenkins swore that Please Wynn came to his house and got a pistol and some whiskey on the night of the Whaley murder, Tipton said, "He swore falsely and without any foundation." And then the line that a jury cannot do anything with, and that a viewer can. I feel that I should say that we are guilty as charged, but we were convicted on perjured testimony from beginning to end. Guilty and convicted on false evidence, both at once. That is a harder thing to say from a scaffold than a simple denial would have been. Then the prediction. I would not care to die so much if the third party was only to go the same way. I know there is no evidence against him except ours. It will not be long now until he, Robert Catlett, will give himself up to the officers, and the result will be an acquittal. But I shall not clamor at all. Signed, J. Catlett Tipton. Please Wynn's statement, printed in the next column, opens the same way and lands harder. I am soon to die, and before the fatal moment arrives, permit me to say that I have no murmur against justice, although I was convicted on the testimony of perjured witnesses who falsely swore my life away. I know that my conviction on the evidence was a mockery of justice, but I know further that the moral turpitude of my crime was such as to merit very severe punishment. Although I did not commit the crime of killing the Whaleys, and then of the man who paid, Bob Catlett deserves punishment that he may never receive. I hope he will not lead anyone else into trouble. Signed, P.D. Wynn. The Maryville Times, a paper with no reason to defend either man, printed its own verdict directly above the statements. We could not help but feel sorry for Please Wynn. He has told the truth in his statements from the beginning and did not do the crime, although he deserved punishment for his part in it. The same paper noted that Bob Catlett was the leader of the gang, that the officers were looking for him, and that it was to be hoped he would receive the punishment he richly deserves. 2 years and 4 months later, on the 8th of November 1901, Bob Catlett walked into the sheriff's office in Sevierville and gave himself up. The Associated Press moved it that night. Bob Catlett has given himself up to the sheriff of Sevier County to answer the charge of being an accomplice in the murder of William Whaley and wife. Pleas Wynn and Catlett Tipton were hanged in July 1899 as the principals in the crime, and it was charged that Bob Catlett paid them a sum of money to get Whaley and his wife out of the way. Catlett was tried and released. He is one of the wealthiest men in Sevier County and is now under a $10,000 bond. He says he has been in South Carolina. On the 31st of October, 1903, the Tennessee Supreme Court reversed and remanded the case of Robert Catlett. The headline in Atlanta the next morning was 3 words longer than it needed to be. He will not hang yet. Catlett is a wealthy citizen of Sevier County who, it was charged, agreed to pay Pleas Wynn and Catlett Tipton for the Whaley murder. They tried him again on the 9th of April, 1904, in a borrowed courtroom in Loudon, Tennessee. A jury acquitted him. Robert Catlett, a wealthy farmer of Sevier County who has been tried 5 times on the charge of being an accessory in the Whaley murder, for which 2 men have already been executed, was acquitted today at Loudon, Tennessee. 5 trials, 2 hangings, 1 acquittal. Catlett Tipton had called it from the scaffold 4 years and 9 months earlier, and he had called it for the right reason. I know there is no evidence against him except ours. The state's whole case against the man who paid rested on the word of 2 men it had already hanged. Every time a jury looked at that, it balked. Here's what is still buried. Nobody knows how many people the White Caps whipped in that county. There was no count kept, because for the first several years there was no one keeping it. The women who were beaten in the early 90s do not appear in the record by name. They appear as a category, in a phrase a reporter thought was descriptive. And we do not know whether the jury at Loudon in 1904 got it right or got it wrong. That is the honest answer. A confession bought with a hanging is not a strong thing to build on. What the record does settle is smaller and harder. 2 men hanged. The man they both named, described in every account as one of the wealthiest in the county, walked out of a courthouse acquitted. Your people were in the Smokies then. Some of them knew these families. Sevier County, Blount County, Jefferson County. Some of them may still have the stories, and I would like to hear them.